meetings that will be setting agendas of more substance. We really won't be getting into any substantive issues today. With me is member Marty West, also Associate Commissioner Regina Robinson, and Catherine Tarka, who is the director of the Center of Instructional Support, and Courtney and Brian, who are here to assist from BESE staff for our meeting purposes. Darlene is expected to join us soon. Payman Rahanaford, who is the fourth member, had already said that he would not be able to join us, but I can, in compliance with the open meeting law, just circle back with him afterwards and kind of give him the substance of what we've discussed. So Marty, with that, if you're set to go, I'll kind of give you a sense of what I see happening with the next three meetings at least, and we can kind of move forward from there.
Sounds very good.
Okay, so at our last meeting, we accomplished two things. We got a good overview of the data and where outcomes stand with early literacy in 2022, with some comparatives to 2019 and a longer sort of longitudinal look at where we've been. I think this was well known to most all of us on the subcommittee, and won't be a surprise to anyone on the committee itself, but it was just a much deeper dive into this particular set of outcomes than normally would happen at a full board meeting. Then we had Dr. Kamiona Burke join us. She had been instrumental in the implementation of Mississippi's law, and she now is working as a consultant with an organization called Excel in Ed. Excel in Ed does work with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on some occasions. We're part of a network that was mentioned of several states that they convene, but this was really more of a volunteer appearance on the part of Dr. Burks, as part of the mission of that organization is to assist states with advocating for comprehensive early literacy policy. And towards that end, I looked at her work as giving us a good framework to establish meetings going forward, because what she did in the guide that was provided to us was break the components of early literacy policy into some very specific areas that I think we can center on. And so at the front end of those, I'm most mindful of the concepts of assessment, and in that area, we have already done some work, assessment and evaluation. We had, as a board, unanimously passed a early literacy screening regulation that now takes us beyond the step of implementing, of suggesting that this work be done, to saying that districts now, are compelled to provide at least a couple of screenings and to respond to it and to notify parents. But that's one step. Implementation actually doesn't begin until a point at the beginning of the next school year, if I remember correctly. And so as a result, we're quite open to sort of still looking at what that means for Massachusetts, whether we actually already taken the steps into best practices, and what other best practice might be. Also, in the area of assessment, I think there are other things that can be looked at in terms of dyslexia screening, which is not the same as the screening that is addressed in this regulation. And so, kind of looking at that more comprehensively, I think is a topic unto itself. Following that, I believe curriculum is another core area. And we have the Massachusetts Curate, which again, we want to look at what's currently going on, look at what are known or perceived as its strengths and its weaknesses, look at how that is implemented as it filters down to the districts, and just get that on the record, have a clear understanding of where we're at. And then again, what else is going on out in the world? What could be done better? How do we position ourselves as the state best implementing these sort of curricular reviews. Following that, it's training for the teacher workforce. And there's both pre-service training, which is a very large conversation about, where the department's role is in licensure, in encouraging best practices in student preparation for college students seeking to be teachers, and what are best practices in terms of practicum and other emerging things. Something that comes to my mind immediately are some experiments going on with apprenticeships in other states. Outside of the pre-service realm, there's also the in-service realm, and making sure that good practices are known and established for training teachers on existing curricula or bringing in new curricula. That you can't just buy a box and know that it's going to happen. We know perfectly well there's a great deal of work that needs to be done with the existing workforce in order to implement best practices going forward. So we know that that's a bucket. And so right now I'm counting about 4 areas. Moving on, there is the, there are just all, actually, I don't need to recite the whole thing. I think you heard her too. But it's my sense of it that at each meeting, we would try to highlight one of those areas and look for folks both within the department and within the field in Massachusetts and beyond to hear the voices that can best express what our options are and what we want to recommend. So that to me is a large part of the heart of the substantive work that we would be doing. So Marty, do you concur with that approach?
Yeah, no, that sounds right. I like the idea of using what Dr. Burke shared as something of a outline for a series of meetings. I like the idea of thinking about stakeholders with information within the department, but also elsewhere in the field. So I think that basic approach makes sense.
Good. And so, again, we have this available for Darlene and Paimon to both circle back to, and the whole point is to do this in public because we're obligated to under the open meeting law, and we should. So then the other sense of what's the outcome of all of that work. Every time we meet, minutes will be generated. And from those minutes, I would like to work with the department to generate a report consolidating the information that we've heard, and then as a committee meet to say, here are a set of recommendations for the department that are actionable in our current legal framework, regulatory framework, and then pass them on to the overall board, to the commissioner, and to the department. And so, that's kind of how all of that would coalesce at the end of the day, is in a report with a set of recommendations geared towards DESE.
So my question about that, Mike, would be, you said a set of recommendations for actions within our current legislative and regulatory framework. It may also be the case that we'll hear ideas that would require legislative changes.
Yeah.
And so we should, I don't know if we're thinking about developing those in parallel. And it also seems to me that it's unlikely that I like the idea of being efficient and using meeting minutes, but it seems to me that there will be cases where we won't be able to get all the way to a recommendation in the context of a meeting where we're also learning about topics. And so there may be some follow-up work that's needed.
That was actually what I was trying to convey.
Okay.
Is ultimately when we've worked our way through the topics that we would have to convene again, and at that time stop taking information and start reflecting and analyzing and recommending. So, but with a little bit of both, and of course, I mean, I think there are certainly plenty of spaces for us to have Q&A opportunities and to sort of suggest action steps on the spot and then revisit them later on when we bring everything back together. So Catherine is with us because the next meeting, which I think is still going to have to be somewhat global in its outlook, I think is best used turning to her office and saying, so what is the state of the art in BESE right now? Because we're not walking in with a blank slate. There's been a tremendous amount of work that's gone on. I'm going to give you a great example. Connecticut required a literacy statute in order to get a statewide literacy strategic plan put in place, which was just enacted at the beginning of this year. We didn't wait for any statutes. Our commissioner tasked his staff with getting this done. They went through a tremendous learning curve, and that was presented to our board. Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, but June of 2020, I think is when that was brought forward.
I think we were talking about it in 2019.
Yeah, and so I may be off by a year, or we may have had some check-ins before the final product came forward, but certainly this is not new work. And from that strategic plan, there's been execution. And so that's where I think putting on the record, where have we executed? What are the highlights? And what kind of walls are we bumping into? I think that's the important next step for us to hear. And again, what I would structure it with as I go through an agenda is just bullet points going through those major topics and then saying, and by the way, is there anything else? So Catherine, does that sound like a good structure to you, or as I'm planning ahead of time, are there any other thoughts you might have on how to move forward?
Just to make sure I'm hearing, the presentation would be bringing the board up to speed on the initiatives that have been undertaken or gains that have been made or accomplishments, work done over the last several years since early literacy became a strategic priority in the department, and also challenges or places where we've faced barriers and haven't been able to make as much progress as we'd like so far. Is that what you're looking for?
Exactly.
That sounds good to me.
Okay, great. And then the other element of that is trying to manage this efficiently in terms of time. As committee people, we're all busy. The department is being very generous with time they don't really have. We've got to be very respectful of that. But the other part is these recorded meetings are public records that are available to everybody. They don't have to go and hunt down minutes. But I think it's incumbent on us then to keep within a reasonable amount of time. So I also want to try to train agendas so that they tend not to exceed 90 minutes, if at all possible. There's never any guarantee of that. There would absolutely be freedom of the committee members to extend with more Q&A and probing questions, and whatever amount of time that needs to take, we should allow it to take. But very often, how much you stack into an agenda says a lot about how long a meeting's going to take place. I think that's my responsibility as chair. And so I'm going to try to make my best guesses to keep it inside about a 90-minute time frame each time we move forward. And so, Catherine, the task for you on that, because you won't be the only speaker, is, I think that if really we just stand to the two topics, it gives you about a total of 40 minutes, and that's leaving a generous amount of time for dialogue.
That's totally doable.
Great. Okay. Marty, anything to add to that?
No.
Great. Okay. Then there's another element that is going to be partially implicit and partially explicit with every meeting going forward. Dr. Robinson has been very generous with her time with me on at least a couple of Zoom calls already, and meeting before and after some of our full meetings to talk about the racial equity decision-making tool, which has been implemented within the department, is a published document that was shared with all of the members ahead of this time, and which I very firmly believe is so aligned with the purposes and the work of early literacy that we'd be remiss not to make good use of it as we move forward. But how do we do that? And so I've studied the document with some care and with some very helpful guidance. I look at the 6 steps and want to try to accomplish 2 things. Number one, to know that all 6 steps will actually be done with some rigor and with some serious fidelity to it. and also that we remain mindful of this, but within the context that we are using this tool, which is different than may happen in other places within the department. We are doing this in a very public forum. We are doing this in a context that does have time constraints that need to be respected. And we're doing it in a forum where we'll be inviting speakers who may know nothing of the racial equity decision-making tool, putting aside that I can certainly prepare them ahead of time and will to the best of my ability. But here's where I think this stands. We started off strong doing just the natural, obvious thing, which is looking at the data. We have tremendous expertise for data within the department. That has been done. Time may go by long enough that there will be some updated information be given to us. We want to be very data-driven with this, and that's part of what the digital equity tool, or the Reddit, is the acronym that they're using. So I'll use that going forward. And so the Reddit already asked for that. The next piece is looking at the historical context. And toward that end, Dr. Robinson recommended another staff member, Komal, and I hope I get her last name correctly, Bashir. Am I reasonably in
It's
the ballpark?
Komal Basine.
Basine, excuse me. Who has spoken publicly in other contexts very effectively about the intersection between history and educational equity. Is that a fair way to frame it, Regina?
Very fair way, yes. She's
Yeah.
one of our lead facilitators on the top, yes.
And so I want to bring in DESE's lead facilitator and put this right on the table, giving her a wide amount of latitude to understand our charge and relate it to the context of Reddit and just give us an overview. So she would be the second speaker at our next substantive meeting. So we have fully put that on the table and have an opportunity to review it. And so, again, I want to bring that out to the committee members. I'm not saying that that is mandatory. I'm saying I strongly recommend that this will strengthen both the process and the outcome. And so I want to do so. Following that, there's a third step. It's actually listed, I think, as step 2, which is stakeholder engagement and a broadened stakeholder engagement. And there, I don't actually think we need committee meetings for that, but rather we need to create platforms, as DESE so often does, to reach out to the very wide network of stakeholders they have, create a workable public forum for stakeholders to engage with this topic, and then to basically speak out to us so that as wide array of citizens of the Commonwealth and interested parties in what we're doing can be heard. My thought on that is that at least on a couple of occasions, that we find some good platform to present information on the state of early literacy. And we happen to live in a moment where there are a couple of very well anticipated documentaries coming out in the near future. One is, I get on a public meeting and I have to absolutely access my notes sometimes to recall even simple titles. But one is called Right to Read. It is based on the experience of a teacher in Oakland, California, by the name of Kareem Weaver, very well-known person in this field. And that is just going out into the public platforms right now. The other is called The Truth About Reading, and it follows a very similar kind of message, although I think it focuses more on the consequences of illiteracy in adulthood, where I think the first documentary focuses a lot more on the state of instruction currently. And there is a third, somewhat shorter venue available called Our Dyslexic Children, which, as so often is the case with dyslexia, on the surface appears to focus on that particular reading barrier. But when you actually see the entire thing, you find out it really does globally look at reading instruction in the early grades in a meaningful way. The benefit of that particular video is it's half the length of the other two, which, for logistics purposes might make a great deal of sense. But my thought is, with the aid of the department or with some stakeholders who have been deeply engaged in this work, it's possible to have a panel, possibly with some of the folks on the screen engaged with it. We can have this in a very public venue where the word is put out ahead of time, and we can then reach out to our stakeholders and say, in the real world, to come hear the message, respond, and speak out. So if we do that a couple of times, I would integrate that information and that feedback into the final report that we have, and at the same time, hopefully honor the Reddit by having done some serious and substantive stakeholder engagement. And the presence of any of us as board members would actually be optional. Just as when we put a regulation out for public hearing, we're not often directly engaged in it. And that puts aside the issues of scheduling meetings and finding, with everything else that would be involved in something like that, a platform that works for the three of us, but makes it absolutely optional for us to have our presence there. And if we know there's going to be three of us present at the same time, it's a simple matter of posting. So I throw that concept out for that one particular leg of the Reddit. Any thoughts or comments on that piece?
So, well, you haven't gone through all of the steps in the decision-making tool, but you zeroed in on the one that I was sort of felt required the most thinking and activity on our part. I think you're right to think that in defining the initiative and grounding it in data and paying attention to issues of racial equity as we do that, we've that's flown very naturally out of the way the initiative was set up. And I think that will also be the case for a lot of what follows. I see the authentic stakeholder engagement as probably the hardest, at least for this project, the hardest step in this tool to do. And I certainly like that idea of, I think you're suggesting bringing people together in person for these screenings. Is that the idea?
Not limiting the feedback to that,
Yeah.
but trying to generate maximum feedback with that.
Yeah, because I think, I think we need to, so I like that idea. I think we should continue the conversation about creative strategies we could use to try to hear from voices that we don't always hear from naturally.
Yes. I and by the way, that's a conception I had, and I am quite open to broadening it and hearing other ideas, and not necessarily on the spot today, but as we reflect on it afterwards. Now, yes, Regina, please.
With that particular step, Member West, it is going to be critical to engage Catherine's expertise, because in our planning meeting leading up to today, Catherine has already led some statewide engagement. And so we can learn from her, and then we can also add through this Reddit lens of racial equity decision-making. We can also look through an equity lens to add to those voices, because the Reddit encourages us to kind of ask who will benefit most from this initiative, and then who's most burdened. And so we can kind of take the framework that Catherine has provided us and the groundwork that she has laid, and then, add additional stakeholder groups to that work. So I think that both and approach could provide to be most effective.
Thank you. And otherwise, as we go through the steps, the actual work of the committee, I think, dovetails very, very naturally. And so I don't have to walk through the remaining steps to just say that in general. You also have to leave some intentionality on the table. And there, when we did a planning meeting for today, again, Regina just came up with a great mode for doing that. If you look at the printed tool that was provided to us, you'll see there was kind of a questionnaire at the back of it. And it's a self-reflective sort of prompt, if you will. And I had this recent experience that I think fits this context really well. I was impaneled on a jury about a week ago. It was a very short trial. And in that short period of time, at the time we were impaneled, at the time we were given the opening description of the case by the
Member Moriarty, I believe you're frozen on the screen. But Member West, since you all think alike, you can finish his sentence.
No, I don't know the story of his time on the jury.
But what happened at the end of it was that we were not asked to, publicly describe our implicit biases, or we weren't even like specifically questioned on them when we were individually questioned, which is called the voir dire. But instead, it was just to make sure we were mindful and that we applied that. I think in our similarly public context, where it is, for several reasons, in my opinion, not fair or reasonable that we do this introspection publicly, that at the end of every meeting to refer back to the tool, go back to those prompts and review for ourselves, where we stand with this so that we can do the best we can, just as I was asked to as a juror, to identify them, put them aside, not act on the implicit biases, but act beyond them. And so I want to take that message. Yes.
Member Moriarty, so your screen froze and you were saying something very particular in regards to what the judge asked of you all
Yes.
while you were on jury duty. Could you just repeat what took place in jury duty? Because I think for Member West and for members of the board, you stated when you were planning with us that there were some particular questions that the judge asked you to reflect on, and that's what you were wanting to relate to this process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That when, and by the way, I get the great benefit of being the foreman, which I never asked for. But as we got into the jury room, we did have to then look at each charge and listen to each element of the law and explain kind of why we felt the outcome that we were favoring was the outcome. And that absolutely brought some of those questions on the table, without divulging, what went on in the jury room in a public way. Now, I think Dr. Robinson gave me a venue or a methodology that can replicate that very nicely when she suggested in the planning meeting 3 very pointed questions about who's not in the room, whose voices are not present to be heard, who has the most to gain, that actually could be on an index card for me, and I can just use as the prompt for us as we close out the meeting. I actually think that's a good use of time. It kind of replicates what we saw with the judge. By the way, did I answer what you were looking for regarding my experience with the
Yes,
jury?
but I think Member West didn't hear. So the judge asked you all a specific question about laying aside your bias, and I think that was the piece that you froze on. So he may not have heard the whole story. What was the question that the judge asked you all to be reflective?
Now I'm freezing again. I'm thinking about the analogy of the box, but that actually was an evidentiary piece. But is that where you're going?
Yes, he asked you all to reflect when he make sure you lay aside any implicit bias.
Right.
You were looking at the law.
And in this way, he gave a great analogy where he said, the evidence has been given to you. Think of that as being placed in a box.
Mm.
Whatever the lawyers had to say to you, whatever you think you knew coming into this outside of the evidence that you were given, that's outside the box. Try to the best of your consciousness and ability to focus your outcome on the box, on the evidence. And I think in terms of equitable outcomes in policymaking, we can do much of the same thing. listen carefully to what we've been heard, reflect on what belongs outside that box as we do that, and then hopefully get to the best, the most just outcome. Did I get it back?
Sure.
All right. So anyway, that experience seemed like a pretty recent and good analogy for me to bring to the table that way. And I think if we follow that process, we will have deployed the Reddit in a unique way that probably we haven't seen a lot of public boards ever do before, and in a way that helpfully gets us the strongest outcome we can get, since we do understand that very much this work is about those subgroups who have gotten the least in the past and need the most help. So there you have it. That's kind of, with that, we'll next look for a date to do a substantive meeting.
Yep.
It will be the two BESE staff members in this case. I'll deploy this as discussed. Offline, we'll work to figure out this stakeholder outreach, which will not engage scheduled meetings. I'm hoping, if it's possible, that we're able to have a substantive meeting. Can be done by Zoom, but if it's in person in Malden, I think that's got some benefits too. I'd like to be able to accomplish that and be able to tell the board about what we've achieved in our next full meeting, which is February 28th. But that's an aspiration. I don't think it's a sure thing at all, but we'll move forward from there.
I will look forward to completing doodle polls and similar tools for aligning calendars.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So that covered everything I've got. Is there anything else in need of discussion?
No, I appreciate your leadership and setting a clear agenda for our work.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you all. I'll be seeing you all very soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.